to everyone who's ever looked at me and thought, how did she do it? How did she go from being married for 26 years to starting over at 49, 50? Some of you may know a little bit of my story and what I've been through in the last 24 months. I've finally have some answers for you. And it wasn't easy to get to this place, but here I am today and sharing. This isn't just a story of divorce, it's a blueprint, really, for anyone, no matter your age or circumstance. And if you need permission to hit the reset button and rewrite your life, you have that permission. And I wrote a book sharing the things that helped me in a very positive way, things that I did, sharing a little bit of my story without getting into the weeds and the darkness of it. But many of you might be able to relate. I woke up many mornings frozen, stuck, no motivation to get out of bed. I would snooze my alarm 3 times, maybe 4 times, and just lay in my bed hoping that it was a dream and that I had a different reality. And at night, going to bed, it wasn't any better. After a long day of working outside the home, cooking, cleaning, doing all of the things and giving attention to my children. It could have been doing homework with them at the table while cooking. Maybe it was filling water bottles for a sporting event or a game or packing snacks or some event. I felt like a robot most days. Like, how could this be my life? And I read all kinds of self-help books in hopes of finding the answer, but the answer was already in front of me. I had ignored that pull. I shoved it down. I put others first constantly. In my 40s, I knew something needed to change, and the something was huge. It was my relationship. And I began evaluating my life, taking inventory on what really mattered, who really mattered. And even though there were people I had cared about for many years, decades even, I realized their season in my life had an expiration. And in some cases, it had been expired for years. And when I thought about food being expired for that long and just keeping it, and it's in its expired state, really made me think of how crazy it was that I kept it that long and it no longer served a purpose in my life. I had prayed, gone to therapy, many different occasions, and I just felt out of alignment with my purpose, as I knew in my heart that God had intended for me. And at one time, we had a shared vision for our lifestyle, and eventually we disagreed on what vehicle to achieve that. And that drove a huge wedge between us. I was constantly wearing a mask to keep him happy and avoid conflict, the detriment of myself. I had so many negative thoughts and influences around me. People I trusted, people I looked up to called me crazy, and they would say things like, have gratitude for the life you have. And it wasn't about not having gratitude, because I certainly did have gratitude, but it was not the life that I knew I was intended to live. I was programmed to be quiet, and that being a good girl didn't rock the boat. Don't stir things up. I've never been mediocre. And I found myself yet again around people, including my partner, that wanted me to dim my light so they could shine. And through more self discovery and using tools like journaling, I was able to see where some of my belief systems were born. And most of what I've come to realization, where our beliefs come from, is our early childhood and how I was raised and my experiences early on, and how these ideas cultivated around my faith and how I learned to survive. And these became survival instincts, survival tactics, survival tools. And I began learning about limiting beliefs. I didn't have the words or vocabulary to call it at the time, but over the last year, I have come to a much greater understanding and why I stayed so long in a toxic environment. Some of them sounded like this: you're too old, you'll be a single mom, and life will be harder. You can't handle raising your children as a single mom financially. You'd be crazy to start a new career in your late 40s. What about your health? Who will help you if you need it? This one really got me when people were just so, I don't know, they thought that this would make me stay, but they said, well, he's going to move on and it's going to be quick, because that's what most men do. And quick was an understatement. Didn't think it would be that quick, a week or two, but hey, to each his own. It was hurtful, but again, that's what I chose to move on, and so he did what he could to move on. And I decided to work on myself and we all have our different paths and different choices. One of the questions that really got me was, can you see him with another woman? And I just thought that was actually crazy because I couldn't see myself with him. And why would I stay with someone that I was not compatible with just for the fact that they're going to find someone else? So keep them and hang on to them in a miserable state because of fear that if they go, they're going to be with someone. Hey, listen, live your best life. Be happy. I want to be happy. You could be happy too. And I knew that I would dictate my happiness, not another person or a man for that matter. Not many people knew my marriage was failing. Very few, in fact. But the few that did know discouraged me for leaving for the sake of the kids. And I can say that I did stay longer than I should have for them, as a lot of women do. But it came to the point that I realized that was not helping them because they were old enough to see the cracks in the mask and the foundation. And I did not want them to have that bad taste in their mouth because they saw a failed marriage with their parents. After years of sitting on the fence and filling my head with all of the reasons I could not divorce my husband, it was time to make a decision. It was the week before Thanksgiving that I walked into the courthouse with my folder of divorce papers. And that was rough, being Thanksgiving, but I had the courage to do it in that moment. And I had to just put all of that out of the way, out of my head, because it would have just been one more reason not to do it. I went to the counter and I asked the clerk many questions. I had him take a look and review my paperwork. My stomach was in complete knots. My voice was very quiet, rasped. My hands were shaking. I could barely breathe. And this was literally felt like ripping the band-aid off of my life. I decided to go back to school and change careers to teaching a year before I had filed. Teaching was always a passion for me, and I was tired of being held back or not given the space for my dreams and goals. I stopped asking and waiting for permission, and I just did it. I walked onto campus, had all of my paperwork in order. I registered for grad school. It took me 2.5 years working full time and a mom to finish. And at 50 years old, I walked onto stage, received my master's degree almost 30 years after receiving my bachelor's. I walked into my new job as a teacher a week after my divorce was official. I didn't even have my degree when I started that job. There's a teacher shortage, so I was able to start, God is good, full teacher pay without my degree. And I did get my degree this past May. A leap of faith. But the more I trusted my gut, the more things started to align and the more things felt lighter and I felt like more of my authentic self. When the mask fell off of my marriage, many people in the community were shocked. I'd been wearing masks for so long, it was almost hard to know what reality was. It was during these interactions with people after the divorce that I realized I was not alone. I was not the only woman that suffered in silence alone from shame of a failed or failing marriage. And being a Christian woman, I felt like I should somehow be helping these women and be in their corner. I was getting inboxed and emailed and texted, and I just knew that I needed to do something. What and how, I had no idea. And as I was healing and going through, and I still continue to go through life and the challenges that it faces every day, the first year was so overwhelming at times. New teacher, newly divorced, only a few months at that. And if you were wondering how I was holding up, well, let me tell you, I was not really holding up much at all. Barely. I ended up in the hospital with an undetermined stroke. I was the youngest patient on the neurological floor, and every doctor was stumped. Blood pressure was through the roof. It wasn't just physical. It was my body screaming under the sheer weight of the pressure, the despair, and the deep, consuming anger I was carrying. And the world had become too much to bear. In that hospital bed, I made a promise to my children, to myself, I was going to heal, get healthy, and live a peaceful life. My divorce wasn't the end of my pain. It was the climax of a storm that had been building for years. And for the last 12 months, I've been quiet, doing the tough work of figuring out what makes Taryn happy and how do I get to a place of peace. If you have ever felt like your stress is literally making you sick, or if you're navigating this messy, painful, but necessary stage or stages of grief while trying to rebuild your life, then my story is for you. My new ebook is for you. It's not a recount of the actual details of my marriage. However, it is a recount of my journey with honesty, and it provides an uplifting guide on how I moved from breakdown to breakthrough, healing my mind and body along the way. And your reset button is waiting for you. If this book sounds of interest to you and that it could be a use for you in your life, type in the comment reset. And when it becomes available in January, you will be the first to know, and you'll be on my list. If you've managed to stay and listen this long, I want to thank you for listening. And again, I hope that this book will encourage you and help you to find ways and steps to get through life and to help you on this journey. That's how Let's Go, Courage to Begin Again, Finding Faith, Freedom, and Purpose After 40 was born.